The marble entrance of the San Francisco mansion gleamed under the November night, pristine and pale as bone. 11:47 p.m. Rain fell in sheets that cut sideways through the darkness, each drop hitting the stone like a tiny blade. She collapsed against the bronze doors with a sound like a whisper, like the last breath leaving something that had already died inside. Valentina Winters. 29 years old but looking like survival had aged her by decades. Blonde hair matted against her face, rain-soaked and plastered to skin that had gone the color of old parchment. Her lips trembled, blue at the edges. The torn grey coat hung open, revealing what made the night truly terrible, a spreading crimson stain across her white shirt where the knife had gone in 3 inches below her ribs. The smell of copper hung in the cold air. Wet pavement. Blood that was still warm. Her knees buckled on marble so white it looked like fresh snow. Inside the security room on the 3rd floor, 2 men in perfectly tailored black suits stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. Carlo and Sal. Suits worth more than most people's cars. They watched the monitors with the kind of attention trained into them over years of watching for threats. One monitor showed the bronze doors. One monitor showed her body sliding down the polished stone. Carlo's hand moved toward the phone. Sal's jaw tightened. Then her voice came through the speakers, fractured and barely audible, a sound like glass breaking underwater. "My children haven't eaten in 3 days." The words hung in the surveillance room like a gunshot. Like an accusation. Like a prayer that had no right to be answered. Carlo and Sal exchanged a look. Neither moved. 1 floor below, in his study lined with mahogany and leather and the weight of 1,000 terrible decisions, Lucian Valenti stood motionless before a wall of screens. His hand held a crystal glass of whiskey that caught the light like amber. His eyes were storm grey, the kind of grey that held no mercy and expected none in return. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, silver in certain light, like something had tried to cut his face in half and nearly succeeded. He was 6'2". Built like a man who had survived things most people could not imagine. His suit, charcoal, Italian, worth $4,000, hung on him like it had been stitched directly onto his body. A gold watch, Patek Philippe, showed the time with absolute precision. His hair was dark, slicked back, silvered at the temples. He had been called many things. Ruthless. Efficient. A man who could order someone destroyed and never blink. In 15 years running the most feared operation in Northern California, he had built an empire on the principle that sentiment was a luxury only the rich could afford, and that kindness was a weapon his enemies would use against him. He watched the screen. He watched her bleed. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The world held its breath. The rain kept falling. The woman on the marble kept trying to say something, her mouth moving around words that would not come. Then his hand was already reaching for the door release. Carlo's voice came through the speaker, tight with confusion. "So?" Lucian did not answer. He was already moving, already gone, his footsteps echoing down the corridor with the precision of a general crossing a battlefield. The lobby doors, brass and mahogany and expensive beyond measure, swung inward. November air poured in like an invasion, carrying the smell of rain and asphalt and something that had been dying for weeks. He stood in the doorway for a single moment, taking in the sight of her. The rain plastering her hair to her face. The blood that had soaked through to her ribs. The way her eyes struggled to focus, to see him, to understand why anyone would open a door for someone like her. Lucian Valenti knelt beside her on that marble floor without hesitation. His hands, the hands that had ordered men buried in concrete, moved with extraordinary gentleness. He was taking in details with the precision of someone trained to understand threat and weakness. Blonde hair, genuine, not dyed. Blue eyes rimmed with dark circles. Calluses on her palms that spoke of labor, of work that had worn her down to bone and determination. She was looking at him like she could not believe he was real. "The knife came from below," she whispered. Her voice was trembling like a candle in the wind. "I ran. I did not know where to go. I saw your gates and I thought maybe someone would answer." "Who did this to you?" "Tyler." My ex-boyfriend. He has been looking for me for 8 months. I have a restraining order, but the police, they do not care. They look the other way because he pays them to. Lucian's jaw went absolutely still. The scar on his face seemed to deepen. How many times has he tried to kill you? Twice. 3 times if you count tonight. He did not respond. Instead, he was already moving, his hand pressing against the wound to slow the bleeding. He called out, not shouting, never shouting, his voice was always controlled, always like thunder bottled in a glass. Carlo. Call Dr. Morrison. Tell him we are bringing her in. And tell him to have transfusions ready. Carlo appeared in the doorway like he had materialized from shadow itself. Sir, should we call? No police. No ambulance. No record that she was ever here. Understood. Lucian lifted her with the kind of ease that came from a man whose body had been trained into a weapon. She weighed almost nothing. Like holding air. Like holding someone the world had already decided to discard. He carried her through the doors and into the warmth of the mansion, and in that moment, though he did not know it yet, something shifted in the careful architecture of his world. She did not know that the child she had been protecting at the homeless shelter 6 blocks away, a little girl with golden hair and his mother's exact shape of eyes, was about to change everything he thought he knew about his own past. She did not know that a man named Tyler Brennan, desperate and vicious, was still circling like a wounded animal, still hunting. She did not know that in 6 hours, a woman named Catherine Mercer, wealthy, connected, cruel in the way only old money could teach, would make a phone call that would set a chain of events in motion. All she knew was that she was being held by someone powerful enough to have answered the door at midnight, and that for the first time in 8 months of running, she was not alone. The rain kept falling outside the mansion. The marble where she had collapsed gleamed clean again, untouched, as if nothing terrible had ever happened there at all. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. The real questions are just beginning. Now let us go back 14 hours earlier. To the moment when Valentina Winters still believed she could survive one more day on $17 and pure desperation. 14 hours earlier, at 9:30 in the morning, Valentina Winters woke to the sound of an alarm that had already been screaming for 30 seconds before her eyes opened. The converted closet that served as her bedroom in the Ashford family's Pacific Heights mansion was so small she could touch both walls if she stretched her arms out while lying in bed. She did not stretch. She simply lay there in the grey November light filtering through a single high window, listening to the chaos beginning on the floors below, children's voices, Mrs. Ashford's imperious tone, the sound of a coffee maker that cost more than Valentina's monthly salary. 4 hours of sleep. That was all she had managed. Her body ached in ways she had stopped cataloguing weeks ago. Her hands, when she held them up to the weak light, showed the kind of wear that came from washing dishes 14 hours a day, scrubbing floors that reflected the marble of a world that would never be hers, changing sheets that smelled like lavender and privilege. She was 27 years old but looked decades older. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes like permanent accusations. Her hair, once thick and glossy brown, had begun to thin from stress and malnutrition. The scar on her left wrist, 3 inches long, pale against her darker skin, throbbed with the cold seeping through the mansion walls. She did not think about the scar. She had trained herself not to think about Tyler Brennan at all, though his presence followed her like a shadow that refused to leave. Instead, she checked her phone. The message from St. Mary's Hospital had arrived at 2 in the morning. Her hands trembled as she read the words again, though she had already memorized them. Final notice. Congenital heart valve replacement surgery required within 5 days. Cost of procedure, $150,000. Insurance denial upheld. No further extensions available. $150,000. In 5 days. She reached beneath her mattress where she kept the envelope. Inside was every dollar she had scraped together in 8 months of 14-hour days. She counted slowly, though she knew the exact number. $17. 3 ones, 1 10, 4 ones, 3 more ones. $17.63 if she counted the loose change in her other pocket. The gap between what she had and what her son needed stretched before her like an ocean with no bridge. Valentina dressed in the dark, black pants, white blouse, sensible shoes worn at the heel. The uniform of invisibility. She had become expert at moving through the Ashford household like a ghost, quiet and faithful and utterly unremarkable. When she opened her closet door, the hinges sighed with a sound like surrender. Downstairs in the kitchen, the Ashford children were already circling the breakfast table like small, beautiful wolves. There was Morgan, age 9, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's dismissive mouth. Sebastian, age 7, who ate everything placed in front of him without tasting it. And little Chloe, age 4, who was the only one who sometimes looked at Valentina like she was an actual person rather than a fixture in the house. "The toast is burnt," Mrs. Ashford said before Valentina had even finished setting down the plate. She was standing in her kitchen doorway wearing a silk robe that cost more than Valentina's entire wardrobe, her hair perfectly set, her expression one of permanent mild offense at the world's failures to meet her standards. "Again. I apologize," Valentina said. Her voice came out thin, the voice of someone used to apologizing for existing. "I'll make fresh." Mrs. Ashford turned away without responding. She never acknowledged thanks or apologies. Valentina was simply there to accept her displeasure and correct it. It was a system that had worked for 8 months. "I like burnt toast," Chloe said, her small voice ringing like a bell in the silence. "It makes crunch sounds." Valentina's chest tightened. She did not allow herself to smile, but she touched the top of Chloe's head as she moved past, the only small affection the girl received from this household. Chloe's mother had hired Valentina to raise her children while remaining fundamentally uninterested in the mechanics of raising them. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Valentina sat on a bench outside the warehouse on Mission Street that had been converted into the St. Francis homeless shelter. This was her break, 2 hours, 3 times a week when Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor in the Tenderloin, watched Lily while Valentina volunteered. Not volunteered exactly. The shelter director, a woman named Rosa with kind eyes and a permanent expression of overwhelm, had stopped asking her to volunteer officially after Valentina had shown up on opening day asking if they needed help. Rosa understood that Valentina wasn't coming here out of charity. She was coming because somewhere inside this warehouse was a child who had learned to recognize the sound of Valentina's footsteps, and that child's world became bearable because of it. The warehouse smelled like industrial soap and something else, the invisible odor of desperation that accumulated when you packed 112 human beings into rows of cots separated by thin fabric dividers. It smelled like bodies that hadn't showered in weeks, like the meals that came from donation drives, like the slow extinction of hope that happened when a person finally accepted that their life had become this. The little girl they called Lily was sitting on her cot in the northeast corner, exactly where she always was. She was 6 years old, with golden hair that fell to her shoulders in waves, and eyes that were an unusual shade of violet that Valentina had never seen on another child. Those eyes looked like they belonged to someone else entirely. Someone rich. Someone who should not be in a homeless shelter, sleeping on a cot next to a woman named Dorothy who talked to people who were not there. The girl had been abandoned 3 months ago near the Embarcadero, found wandering by a social worker who had never been able to trace her back to anyone. No missing person report matched her description. No family came searching. She refused to speak about where she came from or who her parents were. When Rosa had asked her name, she had simply stared with those violet eyes until Rosa, exhausted and underfunded, decided it was easier to call her Lily and move on to the next crisis. But Valentina saw what others didn't. She saw a child who recognized the architecture of abandonment, who understood that the world had its own hierarchy of worth, and that according to every visible measure, she ranked below the notice of almost everyone. Valentina sat on the edge of the cot and let the girl climb into her lap, settling against her chest as if Valentina was the only solid thing in a world that kept dissolving. "I brought you something," Valentina whispered. She pulled a sandwich from her bag, turkey and cheese, the leftover from the Ashford lunch that she had wrapped in foil instead of eating herself. The girl took it without speaking. She never spoke. She simply held Valentina's hand while eating, her small fingers gripping like they were afraid Valentina might disappear. At 6:30 in the evening, Valentina's phone rang. The number was unknown. She almost did not answer. But she was walking back toward the Tenderloin, crossing 5th Street where the November wind cut through her thin jacket like a blade, and in that moment she was so tired and so afraid that she picked up without thinking. "Hello, Val." The voice was smooth, almost gentle, which made it worse. She knew that voice. She had heard it whisper apologies in the dark before everything broke. She had heard it scream. She had heard it do both within the same hour. Her legs stopped moving. Her free hand went to her throat. "How did you?" "I know where you're working now, Val. The Ashford place, right? Those old money people in Pacific Heights. Very respectable. Very clean. I also know about the kid." He was smiling. She could hear it in his voice. 7 years old, heart problem, surgery cost $150,000. Sounds rough. Sounds like something that keeps you awake at night. The wind whipped across her face, bitter and sharp. "Tyler, I don't. You took something from me when you left, Val. You took my pride. You made me look like the kind of man a woman just walks out on. That's not who I am. That's not what people think of me. But they did, didn't they? Because of you." His voice dropped, became almost intimate. "I'm going to take everything from you. Just like you did to me. I'm going to make sure that when you wake up in the morning, there's nothing left that you care about. And then you're going to be very sorry that you ever heard my name." The line went dead. Valentina stood frozen on the sidewalk as the city moved around her. Buses passed with the sound of compressed air. Strangers navigated around her body as if it was an obstacle. Her phone was still pressed to her ear, and she could not lower it, could not feel her arm, could not produce the thoughts necessary to walk forward. At 8:45 in the evening, she stood in Mrs. Chen's small apartment in the Tenderloin, watching her son Lily do his homework at the kitchen table. He was 7 years old, the same age as Morgan Ashford, but the resemblance ended at the surface. Where Morgan was sharp-edged and demanding, Lily was careful and grateful. He was small for his age, his shoulders slightly hunched, his breathing sometimes audible even when he was not moving. His lips had a faint blue tint that had nothing to do with the cold. His heart was failing. The valve that should have been repairing itself as he grew had instead begun to deteriorate. Without surgery, the doctors had explained with careful precision, he would begin to experience more severe episodes. Without surgery, over time, his heart would simply stop working well enough to keep him alive. "I finished my math," he said, looking up at her with dark eyes that were her eyes, shaped by her blood and her genes and her responsibility to keep him alive. "All of it, Mom. I got the Division 1s right." She knelt beside his chair and held him, feeling the flutter of his heartbeat against her chest. It was irregular, skipping sometimes like a record with damage, stuttering, catching itself, resuming. She was holding her son while his heart failed slowly inside his body, and she had $17.93 in the world. Mrs. Chen pulled her aside in the kitchen while Lily worked on his spelling words. "He fainted today," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Just for a moment. I caught him before he fell. Valentina, you're running out of time. He needs that surgery. He needs it now, not in 6 months when you've saved more money. Now." Valentina nodded. She could not speak. Her throat felt like it was closing. At 10 o'clock that night, Valentina pushed through the doors of the St. Francis homeless shelter again. The girl named Lily was already asleep, her small form curled beneath a thin blanket, her violet eyes closed. Valentina pulled up a chair and sat beside the cot, watching the child breathe, watching her chest rise and fall with a rhythm that was steady and simple and everything Valentina's real son could not maintain on his own. 2 children named Lily. One was hers by blood. One had been abandoned by blood and chosen by Valentina's heart. Both would die without money Valentina did not have. She opened her phone and began to add a line to the list she had been keeping. It was handwritten on a piece of notebook paper folded small enough to fit in her pocket. Every debt, every cost, every number that represented the gap between her life and survival. The paper was becoming worn from being opened and closed, from being consulted in dark moments like this one. She wrote, "Tyler Brennan is looking for me. He knows about Lily's surgery. He is going to hurt me. He is going to hurt everyone I love." The pen trembled in her hand. She did not know that at that exact moment, in a penthouse 40 stories above the city, Lucian Valenti was receiving a phone call from one of his men. She did not know that a woman named Catherine Mercer had discovered something about a little girl that would change everything. She did not know that in less than 6 hours, she would be bleeding on marble steps, and that her entire world would restructure itself around a single moment of grace she would never see coming. All she knew was that she was completely alone, completely out of time, and that the man who had nearly killed her before was now circling closer, smelling blood in the water, smiling at the thought of finishing what he had started. The November wind cut through the Mission Street shelter like a blade wrapped in ice. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed their dying song, half of them dark, casting the rows of cots in shadows that seemed to breathe. Valentina moved between sleeping families, her footsteps barely audible on the concrete floor, checking each small form. The night shift supervisor had called her at 10:44 p.m. with 3 words that stopped her heart: "Lily is gone." She had been coming to this shelter for 6 months. 6 months of stolen moments with a child who wouldn't speak, who drew pictures of colors on scraps of paper, who clutched Valentina's hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had proven itself liquid and dangerous. Valentina had never asked questions. The girl had arrived with no name, no history, just violet eyes that seemed older than time itself. Now the cot was empty. The blankets still held warmth. Valentina's breath came faster. She checked the bathrooms, the kitchen where volunteers prepped tomorrow's breakfast, the storage closet where sometimes children hid from the noise. Nothing. The other residents slept on, unaware that something precious had been taken from among them. She moved toward the back exit, toward the alley behind the building where the dumpsters sat like metal sentries in the dark. That's when she heard it. A whimper. Small. Terrified. She pushed through the back door into rain that fell like needles, cold enough to steal breath. Her thin jacket, the only one she owned, soaked through in seconds. Behind the dumpster, curled into herself like a question mark, was Lily. The girl's lips were purple. She wore only a thin shelter-issued nightgown. When she saw Valentina, she pointed across the alley with a trembling hand. A man stood across the street under the broken neon of a closed bodega. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Familiar in a way that made Valentina's blood turn to ice water in her veins. Tyler Brennan. He smiled. The same smile from 8 months ago when she'd finally packed a single bag and run. The same smile from the nights he'd held her down and told her no one would believe her anyway. The rain fell on him and he didn't move, didn't blink, just smiled like he'd been waiting for this exact moment since she'd disappeared. He started walking toward them. Valentina grabbed Lily's hand and ran. Her shoes slipped on wet pavement. Behind her, she heard his footsteps, steady and unhurried, because he knew she had nowhere to go. He had hunted her for 8 months. He had found her jobs and burned them down. He had followed her to 3 different cities before she'd finally made it to San Francisco, where she'd thought the distance and the rain might hide her. But rain didn't hide anyone. Distance didn't matter when a man was patient and cruel. "You can't protect everyone, Val," he called behind her, his voice carrying through the November night like a curse. "That little girl isn't yours. Your son is waiting for you to give up." Valentina didn't respond. She pulled Lily deeper into the Mission District, cut through an alley where neon reflections pooled on wet pavement like spilled paint, past closed storefronts and chain-link fences. Her side screamed where the old wound had never fully healed. Her lungs burned. But Lily's small fingers gripped hers, and that was enough. Then she remembered. Something Lily had whispered during a nightmare 3 weeks ago, the only words the girl had spoken in all their time together. An address. A number that made no sense for a homeless child to know, but it had lodged in Valentina's mind like a prayer. 2847 Broadway. Pacific Heights. She didn't know why she ran toward it instead of away. Instinct, maybe. Or the kind of desperation that stops thinking and starts doing. They emerged from the neighborhoods of the poor onto streets lined with mansions, each one worth more than Valentina would make in 5 lifetimes. The houses got bigger, more impossible. Then she saw it. An iron gate. Marble columns visible beyond. A bronze intercom mounted on stone that gleamed even in the rain. Behind them, Tyler's footsteps echoed off the pavement. Valentina pressed the button. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely keep her fingers on the metal. A voice came through, professional and cold, "State your business." She couldn't speak. Her breath came in gasps. Tyler was a block away now, maybe less. She could hear his breathing, synchronized with her own. "Please," she managed. "Please. This little girl, she knows this address. Please. He's going to kill us both." For one eternal second, nothing happened. The gate remained closed. Tyler kept walking. The rain kept falling. Then the intercom buzzed, a sound like electricity, like salvation, like mercy arriving 30 seconds before everything ended. She carried Lily through the gate. Behind her, Tyler broke into a run. She heard the knife before she felt it, the small sound of steel being drawn, a whisper of leather. She was 3 steps from the bronze doors when he caught her arm, spun her around, and the blade went in below her ribs, 3 inches deep, white-hot pain that was almost a relief because at least the waiting was over. She screamed. The sound brought 2 men in black suits running from the mansion, their movements fluid and precise. They were on Tyler before he could pull the knife free. He tried to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. A man in a dark cashmere coat emerged from behind them, moving with the kind of deliberate grace that belonged to someone used to having the world move out of his way. Lucian Valenti. Valentina's vision blurred. The blood on her white shirt had spread to the size of a dinner plate. She sank to her knees, holding Lily, feeling the cold of the marble against her legs. Above her, she heard Lucian's voice for the first time, deep and solid like an oath, giving commands that moved men like they were chess pieces. She heard Tyler being dragged away. She heard the gates buzzing shut. She heard the rain. Then she heard nothing at all. When Valentina woke, she was in a bed worth more than every place she'd ever slept combined. Chandeliers threw fractured light across silk sheets the color of cream. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco's light scattered across the darkness like diamonds someone had carelessly dropped. Her side was stitched with precise surgical care, and the 6-year-old Lily was asleep beside her, still clutching her hand like she might dissolve if she let go. A man sat in a chair by the window. Motionless. Waiting. Lucian Valenti was exactly what Valentina had imagined when she'd heard his name whispered in homeless shelters and subway stations. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark hair silvered at the temples. A scar ran from his right eye to his cheekbone, a map of violence survived. But it was his eyes that stopped her breathing. They were winter gray, and they held the weight of 15 years of power, of choices made and unmade, of all the mercy he'd learned to do without. When she tried to sit up, pain shot through her abdomen and she gasped. Lucian didn't move. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, like thunder heard from very far away. "What is that child's full name?" Valentina blinked at him, confused. I don't know. The shelter just called her Lily because she wouldn't speak. I've been visiting her for 6 months. She won't tell anyone where she came from. Lucian stood. He walked to the bed with a slowness that felt intentional, like he was giving himself time to make a decision. His hands were shaking. In the hallway, 2 men watched from the doorway, Carlo and Sal, his lieutenants, exchanging a look neither had seen in 15 years. In 15 years of working for Lucian Valenti, they had never seen him shake. He pulled out his phone. Showed her a photo. a baby girl with violet eyes. Impossibly familiar. Impossibly impossible. 6 years ago, Lucian said, and his voice was different now, rougher somehow, like it was dragging across broken glass. My brother sold my daughter to settle his gambling debts. I was building this organization. Making choices between mercy and survival. I chose survival. I ordered him out of the family. I thought my daughter was dead. I have looked for her every single day since. Valentina looked at the sleeping child beside her. The same violet eyes. The same impossible face, older now, marked by months in shelters, but unmistakably his. "This is your daughter," Valentina whispered. Lucian nodded. He sat back in the chair, and for a moment he looked like a man made of stone who had just discovered he could feel pain. At 4:16 a.m., Valentina asked to see her son. Lucian made a phone call, and within the hour, Lily Winters arrived at the mansion, 7 years old, with his mother's dark hair and a blue tinge around his lips that spoke of a heart that was slowly, inevitably, failing. When he saw Valentina sitting up in that impossible bed, bandaged but alive, he ran to her. She held him despite the pain, and over his shoulder, she saw Lucian watching them with an expression that looked like grief and hope fighting for space in the same chest. The morning broke grey and cold. Valentina told her story in full, the live-in nanny position with the Ashford family, 14-hour days in exchange for a converted closet and the leftover scraps from their kitchen. Tyler Brennan. The illusion of love followed by the weight of his hands. The running. 8 months in San Francisco, washing dishes and cleaning hotel rooms and selling plasma twice a week, watching the numbers in her bank account move backward no matter how many hours she worked. And Lily Winters. Her real Lily. Heart surgery required in 5 days. Cost, $150,000. Savings, $17. "Why would you help me?" Valentina asked him. "I'm nobody. A stranger who bled on your doorstep." Lucian was silent for a long moment. The morning light caught the scar on his face, and it seemed to move like something alive. "You protected my daughter for 6 months when you had every reason to focus only on your own son's survival," he said finally. "You brought her here instead of running alone. That is not nobody." At 7:44 a.m., a white Mercedes pulled up to the gates. Catherine Mercer emerged like a predator testing the wind, diamond earrings catching the grey light. She was the kind of woman who had learned that the world bent for those willing to bend it first. She walked into Lucian's study uninvited, smiling like a blade. "Lucian, darling," she said. "I hear you're harboring a woman who belongs to someone else. Tyler is a business associate. I'd hate for this to become complicated." "Get out of my house, Catherine," Lucian said. "That woman has information that could damage me. I want her disappeared. You understand business, don't you?" Lucian stood. Something in his expression made Catherine take a step back, her hand reaching for the door. "Tell Brennan if he comes near these gates again, he won't walk away," Lucian said quietly. Catherine's smile sharpened. "You're making a mistake choosing her over our arrangement. I have connections too, Lucian. City Council. Police Chief. Federal prosecutors. Think carefully." She left. The door closed with the finality of a coffin lid. At 10:08 a.m., Lucian slid a check across his desk. $150,000. Valentina's hands trembled as she read it. Lily Winters. San Francisco General Hospital. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "Consider it payment for saving my daughter's life," he said. She took the check, tears spilling down her face. What she didn't know was that Tyler Brennan was across the street, watching through binoculars, making calls to Catherine Mercer, who was already moving pieces into motion. What she didn't know was that they had less than 48 hours before everything exploded into violence again. What she didn't know was that this moment of safety was about to become the eye of a hurricane that would require Lucian Valenti to choose between his empire and one woman's survival. But for now, in this quiet morning, she held the check and felt, for the first time in 8 months, like maybe the rain might finally stop. The marble floors of Lucian Valenti's mansion gleamed under the soft glow of recessed lighting at 6 o'clock in the evening. Valentina Winters sat in the waiting area outside the surgery wing of San Francisco General Hospital. Though she was not truly sitting, she was existing in a state between motion and collapse, her body folded into a leather chair that cost more than 3 months of her old rent, her hands trembling so violently she could not hold a coffee cup without spilling it across her lap. In the operating room down the hallway, her son Lily lay under anesthesia, his tiny chest open to a team of cardiac surgeons who were replacing a valve that had never worked properly, a valve that had been slowly stealing his life since birth. The $150,000 check, Lucian's check, had cleared at 3:38 in the morning. The surgery had begun at 4:15 a.m. Now, at 6:06 p.m., they were 3 hours into what the surgeon said would take 5 hours total. Lucian's 6-year-old daughter, also named Lily, sat beside Valentina and held her hand with the solemn focus of a child who understood, without being told, that this moment mattered. The girl's small fingers pressed into Valentina's palm like a prayer, like an anchor, like the only thing keeping her from dissolving into the terrible silence of waiting. "He will be okay," the little girl said. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the certainty only children possess. Because you love him. Because Mr. Lucian loves you. Because good people don't die. That's what my papa said. Valentina pulled the child closer, burying her face in the girl's dark hair, smelling the strawberry shampoo and the clean fabric softener of a life lived in safety. She had never known what it felt like to be held while she was afraid. She had never known what it felt like to have someone stand between her and the darkness. At 8:36 p.m., the surgeon emerged. The valve replacement was complete. Successful. Lily would live. Valentina collapsed against the hallway wall and wept in a way she had not wept since she was a child herself, the kind of weeping that comes from 8 months of holding yourself together by force of will alone, the kind that can only be released when the fear finally stops. But fear had only changed shape. It had not truly stopped. By the time Lucian arrived at the mansion that evening, Valentina was in his study, staring at the blank page in front of her. Rain hammered the windows with the violence of a fist, November cold pressing through the glass like a blade wrapped in ice. Her fingers shook as she gripped the pen. She had already written 3 letters. Torn them up. Started again. The words would not come in the way she needed them to come. Because what do you say to the man who saved your son's life when you are about to destroy his? She thought of Catherine Mercer's smile, thin and sharp as a knife edge. She thought of Tyler Brennan's voice on the phone at 6:16 p.m., calm and certain, "I'm coming for you tonight, Valentina." Catherine has friends in the police department. The kind of friends who don't ask questions. "You have 2 hours before I arrive with a warrant and 3 uniforms. Run, hide, it doesn't matter. I will find you. And this time, when I take you, there will be no one to stop me." She knew he was right. Catherine Mercer did not make empty threats. Catherine Mercer made phone calls, and the world reorganized itself around those calls. The pen felt heavier than the knife wound in her side, heavier than 8 months of running, heavier than every lie she had ever told to survive. She wrote, "Lucian, I cannot let my presence endanger you or your daughter. Tyler won't stop. Catherine has resources I cannot fight. You have given my son a chance at life. The surgery is happening right now because of you. That is more than I ever dreamed possible. But if I stay, they will come with police and lawyers and violence, and I won't let your daughter lose you the way I almost lost my son. I'm leaving tonight. I need you to know that these past 2 days have shown me something I thought was gone from the world, someone who chooses to save instead of destroy. I will carry that with me wherever I go." She stopped. Her hand trembled. She wrote the final line, the words that terrified her most. "I think I'm falling in love with you, and that's exactly why I have to leave." She folded the letter. Checked on Lily one last time, the girl sleeping peacefully in the guest room, her small hand curled against her chest like she was holding something precious. She packed her single bag, the one she had been living out of for 8 months. At 10:24 p.m., she walked toward the front door, her hand on the bronze handle that was worth more than her childhood home. Then the security monitor flickered. A car pulled through the gates. Lucian's car. He was not supposed to be home for another hour. She stood frozen in the entrance hall as the front door opened and he stepped inside, rain dripping from his cashmere coat, his dark eyes immediately finding her where she stood with the letter in one hand and her bag in the other. "You were going to disappear," he said. "Not a question." "I have to," Valentina whispered. "They're coming tonight." Tyler called. "Catherine's orchestrated police involvement. I won't let you lose everything because of me." Lucian crossed the room in 3 strides. When he spoke, his voice was like thunder, like an oath carved into stone. "You think I built this empire by running from threats? You think I became what I am by choosing safety over what matters? This isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you saved my daughter. You made it my fight when you walked through those gates bleeding and still thinking about someone else's safety." He took the bag from her hand and dropped it to the floor. "I'm not letting you go." Then the windows shattered. The sound came like the world breaking open, gunfire, screaming, the terrible crunch of tempered glass fragmenting into 1,000 pieces. Lucian pulled Valentina behind him as his men materialized from the shadows like they had been waiting in the darkness all along, weapons drawn, positioned with the precision of soldiers who had trained for exactly this scenario. At 10:51 p.m., Tyler Brennan and 8 men, including 3 uniformed San Francisco police officers whose uniforms had been purchased with Catherine Mercer's money, stormed through the mansion's broken entrance. They moved with the false authority of men who believed the law was on their side, who believed corruption could make them invincible. Tyler's voice echoed through the marble entrance hall, "Valentina Winters, you're under arrest for theft and fraud. Come out now." Carlo and Sal stepped forward, blocking the doorway with their bodies, with their weapons, with 8 years of loyalty to a man who had never asked them to compromise themselves until now. Tyler saw Valentina behind Lucian and smiled the smile of a man who believed he had already won. "There you are. Thought you could hide behind money? Catherine promised me you'd be arrested by midnight. Funny how the world works when you know the right people." Valentina stepped forward, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "I'm not hiding. I'm done running from you." Tyler laughed and moved toward her. Lucian blocked his path with the kind of movement that suggested violence was imminent, inevitable, and would not take long. The corrupt officers reached for their weapons. The standoff stretched across 3 seconds that felt like 3 centuries. Then Lucian made a call. One sentence: execute. At 11:22 p.m., 12 men in black tactical gear moved through the mansion like phantoms. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agents who had been building a case against Catherine Mercer and her network of corrupt officials for 18 months. Lucian had made a deal 3 days ago, full cooperation, all evidence, complete testimony, in exchange for immunity and one thing only: Valentina Winters' safety, guaranteed. The raid was surgical. Night vision goggles. Synchronized entry. Weapons drawn and aimed with the precision of professionals. The corrupt officers were separated and disarmed in 30 seconds. Tyler Brennan collapsed to his knees, his hand shaking violently as an FBI agent read his rights in a voice that admitted no negotiation. "Tyler Brennan, you're under arrest for attempted murder, stalking, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy with corrupt law enforcement officers. Federal charges. You have the right to remain silent." Tyler began to sob, his body folding like a puppet with its strings cut. He had believed himself invincible. Now he was nothing. Now he was nobody. Meanwhile, across the city at Catherine Mercer's penthouse, federal agents were executing a simultaneous warrant. Catherine was led out in handcuffs at dawn, pushed into a black SUV while news cameras captured every moment. Her face appeared on every morning show by 6:06 a.m. Bribery. Conspiracy. Corruption of public officials. Her social connections meant nothing against federal charges with documented evidence. The prosecution was methodical and complete. At 9:36 a.m. the following morning, in a federal prosecutor's office with windows overlooking San Francisco Bay, Tyler Brennan sat across from his court-appointed attorney. The prosecutor laid out the case: 40 years. Federal prison. No parole eligibility. Every charge, every witness, every piece of evidence documented and irrefutable. The attorney said there was no deal to be made. Tyler's hand shook as he signed the plea agreement that would consume the next for decades of his existence. Catherine Mercer's trial would take longer, but the outcome was never in doubt. 35 years. Asset seizure totaling $8.2 million. Her penthouse seized by federal authorities. Her reputation destroyed in the court of public opinion. Every news outlet in the country ran the story. Within 48 hours, 2.3 million people had watched the footage of her arrest. They would both spend decades in federal facilities, remembering what they had tried to do. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. This was something different. This was the slow, systematic destruction of everything they had built. This was understanding, every single morning for the next 40 years, that they had chosen the wrong person to break. Justice, Lucian understood, was not about vengeance. Justice was about making certain that evil understood, with absolute clarity, that it had lost. 3 weeks had passed since the federal agents led Tyler Brennan away in handcuffs, since Catherine Mercer's penthouse was seized and emptied, since the news cameras finally stopped circling. 3 weeks of rain clearing from San Francisco, of November gray softening into December light, of a world that had tilted on its axis slowly, carefully returning to some new version of balance. In the mansion's sunlit breakfast room, Valentina Winters sat at a table that could have fed 20, and it held only 4. Her son Lily, 8 years old now, spooned cereal into his mouth with the casual ease of a child who no longer counted calories. His lips were pink instead of the terrible blue they had been. His breathing came easy, no longer labored through the hole in his heart that surgery had finally closed. Across from him, Lucian's daughter, also named Lily, age 6, adopted officially now, the paper signed in a lawyer's office with Valentina listed as co-guardian, drew pictures in orange juice on the table with a piece of toast, completely unconcerned with the rules of breakfast etiquette. "Tina, look. I made the sky," the girl said, holding up her juice-stained artwork. Valentina's throat tightened. Tina. Not Miss Valentina. Not the woman from the shelter. Just Tina. Someone who belonged. She had moved into a guest suite on the 3rd floor. She no longer slept in the converted closet of another family's house, no longer woke to the sound of someone else's alarm clock, no longer rushed through a 14-hour shift knowing her own son waited alone in the dark. The wound on her ribs had closed. The knife that Tyler had driven into her flesh had left a scar, but scars, she was learning, could become proof of survival instead of reminders of shame. Lucian appeared in the doorway like someone who had learned to exist in light rather than shadow. He wore an open-collared charcoal shirt, no jacket, no armor of tailored fabric. His dark eyes found Valentina first, held there for a moment longer than necessary. Carlo stood behind him in the hallway, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. The expression was so unusual on the lieutenant's weathered face that Sal, passing by with a coffee cup, had to do a double take. Sal leaned close to Carlo in the kitchen. His voice dropped to a whisper, 3 weeks. He's been smiling. I didn't know his face could do that. Carlo nodded slowly. 15 years I've worked for him. He never smiled like this. Never smiled at anyone like this. Lucian crossed the breakfast room and kissed the top of his daughter's head, then, in a movement that looked both natural and impossible, bent down and kissed Valentina's temple. Her son watched this with the clinical interest of a child absorbing new information about how the world worked. "We should go to the garden," Lucian said. His voice carried the weight of something unfinished, something that needed to be said in the place where it had all begun. The garden in December was not beautiful. It was bare, stripped down to earth and empty branches and the dark lines of paths that led nowhere visible. But the sun warmed it, and when Lucian and Valentina walked through the iron gate together, they could hear the children laughing inside the house behind them, a sound like bells. "My brother Marco used to sit here," Lucian said. He stopped near the fountain, the one that had run dry years ago. Right there, on that bench. He would sit here and gamble on his phone, betting money he didn't have on horses that never won, on cards he couldn't read. He owed $200,000 to men who didn't accept excuses. Valentina listened. She had learned that some stories needed silence around them, room to breathe. When the men came to collect, Marco had a choice. Pay or die. But he didn't have the money. So he found another payment. Lucian's voice did not break, but something in it bent. He sold my daughter. Sold her to traffickers because it was easier than admitting he had gambled away everything. Easier than facing what he had done. The wind moved through the bare branches. It sounded like a whisper without words. I found out what he did. And I had a choice of my own. I could forgive him. Show mercy. Choose the brother I had known over the survival of the empire I had built. Or I could cut him out. Exile him. Make it clear that no one, betrays this family and lives in our circle. He turned to face her. His eyes were storm gray, and in them lived 15 years of searching for a daughter he had believed was dead. I chose survival, Lucian said. I ordered him gone. And every day after that, every single day, part of me wondered if I had sacrificed my child for business. If my mercy would have cost me everything. I spent 6 years believing she was dead. 6 years knowing I had made the choice that killed her. Valentina reached out and took his hand. It was calloused from a different kind of work than hers had been, but it was real and warm, and it fit against hers like they had been measured for each other. You found her because she found me first, Valentina said. The universe doesn't work in straight lines, Lucian. Sometimes the path is broken. Sometimes it has to break to lead you where you need to go. I was in that shelter with Lily because I had nowhere else to run. Your daughter was in that shelter because she had nowhere else to hide. And I kept her alive until her father could find her again. Maybe that was the only way it could happen. They stood like that for a long time, with the winter sun on their shoulders and the empty fountain between them and the rest of the world. That evening, as darkness fell and the mansion filled with the smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen, a smell that had not existed in this place for years, Valentina's son asked the question that would change everything. Are we staying here? Lily asked. He was in the living room with Lucian, who was teaching him to play chess, a game the boy had never learned because there had never been time, never been stillness, never been anyone patient enough to teach him. Is this home now? Lucian moved a knight across the board. He looked at the boy for a long moment. Do you want it to be? Lily considered this with the seriousness of a child who had learned young that wanting things was dangerous. But then he nodded. Yes. I want to stay. I want Lily to stay. I want Tina to stay. Lucian called Valentina into the room. She came from the kitchen, still wearing the apron she had borrowed, her hands dusted with flour from bread she had learned to bake in the last 3 weeks. Lucian stood up and looked at her with an expression that held no calculation, no strategy, no manipulation. Just a man looking at a woman as if she were the answer to a question he had stopped asking because he thought the answer was dead. Later, in his study, with the city lights of San Francisco spreading out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows like someone had scattered diamonds across black silk, Lucian and Valentina stood on opposite sides of his desk. The same desk where he had ordered the destruction of his enemies. The same desk where he had conducted 15 years of business built on fear. What do you want? He asked her. I can give you money. A house. Protection. Distance if that's what you need. I can make sure you and your son never have to run again. Valentina's hand shook. They shook because she had spent 3 weeks not believing this was real, because she had learned the hard way that good things were tricks, that safety was temporary, that men who promised to help always wanted payment in blood or flesh. I want to stop running, she said. Her voice was steady now, bone-deep steady. I want my son to grow up without fear. I want your daughter to know she's loved by someone she doesn't have to earn love from. And I want to understand what this is between us. Because I don't think it's gratitude. I don't think it's transaction. And if I'm wrong, I need you to tell me now, before my heart believes something that isn't true." Lucian came around the desk. He moved like someone who had forgotten how to walk through a room without purpose, without threat, without the weight of an empire on his shoulders. But this movement was different. This was simply a man walking toward a woman. "I haven't let anyone close in 15 years, he said. "Not since my brother taught me that trust is a weapon. That the people closest to you are the ones who can shatter everything. But watching you with our children, seeing you choose courage every time you were terrified, seeing you give everything you had to a child who wasn't even yours, I think maybe I'm willing to be broken again. I think maybe that's what it means to actually live instead of just survive." He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But his hand found hers on the desk, and his fingers closed around her palm with such gentleness that Valentina understood, in that moment, what it meant to be held, not conquered. His hand covered hers, warm and solid, like a promise written in flesh instead of words. What she did not know was that Lucian had already transferred $500,000 into a trust fund for her son's future, that he was having documents drawn up to legally adopt his daughter with Valentina listed as primary guardian, that he had spent the last 3 weeks building a legal and financial fortress around her and the children so complete that nothing in the world could ever hurt them again. She did not know that his lawyers were setting up a foundation in her name, that his money was already flowing into a shelter on Mission Street with her vision behind it, that he had begun, in these 3 weeks, to turn his empire away from darkness and toward light. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the weight of his hand. What mattered was that she was not alone anymore. How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.